These verses are a little dark, okay? They're not the happiest verses in the Bible. I'll give you that. But to set this up so that you can understand the scene, we need to go back to chapter 4. Because back in chapter 4, beginning in verse 32, Luke writes, "Now the full number of those who believed were of one heart and soul, and no one said that any of the things that belonged to him was his own, but they had everything in common. And with great power, the apostles were given their testimony to the resurrection of the Lord Jesus, and great grace was upon them all." And this is what great grace being upon them all actually looks like. "There was not a needy person among them, for as many as were owners of lands or houses sold them and brought the proceeds of what was sold and laid it at the apostles' feet, and it was distributed to each as any had need. Thus Joseph, who is also called by the apostles Barnabas, which means son of encouragement, a Levite, a native of Cyprus, sold a field that belonged to him and brought the money and laid it at the apostles' feet." Okay, that's what's going on, and then it goes immediately into this account regarding Ananias and Sapphira. So for years, the interpretation of this story eluded me. It just seemed so cold-hearted, so unforgiving. These two people, first the husband and then the wife, give most of what they have. They sell their property and they give more than a tithe to the church. Okay, they're relatively generous people. Okay, they sell their property and they give, more than a tenth of what they earned to the church. And they tell what we might call a little white lie by claiming that they're giving the church the full amount, but are in fact keeping back a little bit for themselves. And what do they get for this little white lie? They're struck dead. Dead. It's not even like they get sick and die over a period of time. Ananias just drops dead, and his wife's at the mall and comes back 3 hours later thinking she was going to show her husband what she purchased. After all, they had a little bit more disposable income now. And she comes in, and Peter's waiting. And he tests her. "Hey, did you give all of the money that you made from the sale of that land to the church?" And keeping with her husband's lie, she says, "Yeah, I did." And he says some of the most chilling words when he says, "How is it that you have agreed together to test the Spirit of the Lord? Behold," listen to this is chilling. "Behold, the feet of those," this is how she found out her husband was dead, okay? "Behold, the feet of those who have buried your husband are at the door, and they will carry you out." That's it. And then immediately she drops dead. This seems a little harsh. It seems so cold, and it seems so unforgiving. And then one day I realized that the cold-heartedness of this passage is intended to show just how deadly and unforgiving a life of self-salvation can be. Because when you read this, and this is the way I understood it, whenever this passage was preached to me or I heard a sermon on this passage growing up, this was the moral of the story. You better not lie to God. Remember Ananias and Sapphira? Okay? You never know. It's a dangerous, dangerous thing to lie to God. So if you lie to God, he might strike you dead. Don't do it. Let's close in prayer. Okay, that was kind of the way this passage was preached. And I knew that it was bad to lie to God, but it just didn't seem primarily that that's what was going on here. Ananias and Sapphira are no different than you and me. Okay, it's easy to see them as negative examples and to separate ourselves from them. As you heard David say the other day, David Zoll, perhaps if you were here, and as you heard me say a couple weeks ago, we may all say we have fallen short of God's glory, but that doesn't prevent us from comparing distances, okay? We may never say in a million years, I'm clean, but we say all the time, at least in our hearts, I'm cleaner than him, I'm cleaner than her. And so it's dangerous to look at some of these negative examples in the Bible and say, geez, I mean, I would never do that. But the fact of the matter is, Ananias and Sapphira are really no different than you and me. They saw an opportunity to advance their reputation and put themselves in a position to be thought of as holy, and they took it. That's really what was going on here. This wasn't primarily about financial greed, as we'll see in a few minutes. It was something much deeper than that. Financial greed was sort of the fruit of a much deeper problem. We do the same thing. We do what they did. Pretending to be someone we're not is about as natural to us as breathing. Okay, pretending that we are someone that we are not comes as natural to us as breathing. We inside the church are masters of disguise. Masters of disguise. We deceive ourselves and others into believing that we are cleaner and more pious than we are, that we're more put together than we are, that we have more control over our lives than we actually do. We deceive not just other people, but we deceive ourselves into believing those things. We may say we believe in justification by grace, but we live as if we believe in justification by works. And the fruit of justification by works, as we see here, is hiding who we really are from ourselves and others. That's the fruit. We have to hide. In order to feel alive, in order to feel like we have some measure of value and significance and purpose and all of those things, in order for us to get the approval and the love and the acceptance that we crave, we have to manufacture a lovable self that is not true about us. We lie to ourselves and we lie to others because, in the infamous words of Jack Nicholson, we simply can't handle the truth. We just can't. We can't handle the truth about ourselves. There is not one person alive that isn't hiding truth about themselves for fear that they would lose love and approval. Not one. There is not one person alive, there is not one person in this room that is not hiding truth about themselves for fear that they would lose love and approval. We hide truth about ourselves from ourselves, refusing to believe what is actually true about us. This is, in theological terms, justification by works. Not because we think we're trying to earn points with God, therefore, so that we can therefore go to heaven. We may not be guilty of that, but we sort of leave the gospel behind after we become Christians. It's kind of in the rearview mirror, and it's almost as if we say, we get to heaven because of all of Christ's work, but we actually find meaning and value and significance and love and acceptance here on earth as a result of all of our work. And so Jesus was super relevant in our past, and he'll be really, really relevant for our future, but we are most relevant in the present. We are the ones that, I've said this before, it was Jesus' blood, sweat, and tears that got us in, but it's our blood, sweat, and tears that keep us in. And so we find ourselves addicted to all sorts of self-salvation projects here on the ground. And therefore we hide truth about ourselves from ourselves, refusing to believe that we are as desperate and as bad and as selfish and as greedy as we actually are. Our deepest longing is for love and approval, and so we work to conceal the worst parts about us and manufacture, as I said, a lovable self that we not only want others to believe, but a lovable self that we want to believe ourselves. This flat wears us out. Okay, if you feel exhausted on a regular basis, as I do, you need to know something. The root cause of your exhaustion, the root cause of my exhaustion, is not something outside of us. It's not difficult children or a difficult workplace. It's not anything outside of us, the busyness of life and all of those things. The root cause of our exhaustion is inside of us. The root cause of our exhaustion is that we are perpetually doing more, trying harder, doing our best to get better, because we actually believe that the attainment of what our hearts long for most is riding on our shoulders. And what we crave, what we want more than anything else is love and acceptance. We want to love ourselves. We want other people to love us. We want people to think well of us. We want to have a good reputation. We want to believe the best about ourselves, which is why we are so grateful for people like Charles Manson. Because there is at least someone. We're so grateful for people like Adolf Hitler and Mussolini and Joseph Stalin and the villains of history, because we can at least say there are people who are worse than we are. Thank God. I mean, it's amazing to me how many Christian people now, I'm not talking, this happens outside the church all the time as well, but it's amazing to me how many Christian people celebrate the failure of a brother or a sister in Christ. I mean, they celebrate it. It's almost like there are people out there wanting us to mess up, wanting us to be tripped up. Well, why is that the case? I mean, why is it? Because we desperately want to feel like we may not be perfect, but we're more right than he is. We may not be holy, but we're more holy than he is. We may not even be all that smart, but we're smarter than she is. I mean, we have to manufacture this kind of acceptable, lovable self in order for us to attain the meaning and the value that we crave. And so we do this not only because we want others to believe this about ourselves, but we do this because we want to believe this about ourselves as well. None of us want to be exposed. We all have secrets and things about us that we don't want anyone to know about. We all have secrets and things about us that we don't want anyone to know about. I mean, and I've said this before, but just in case you don't think that's true about you, okay, just in case you're thinking, listen, obviously this guy hasn't watched me live. I am righteous, okay? I have been a good and faithful husband my whole life. I've been a good and faithful wife my whole life. We have disciplined our children in love. We have raised our children in such a way that they are all now walking with the Lord. I mean, just in case, I have never cheated. I have never, I've lied, but that was a long time ago. I gave that up when I was 12, but I haven't lied since then. I mean, when I look at myself in the mirror, I may not really like what I see physically, but I like what I see spiritually. I'm actually pretty good. Well, if that's true about you, I have two things to say. Number one, go listen to my sermon series on the 10 Commandments that I preached this fall. Okay, that's the first thing. By the way, my publisher was here this weekend for the conference, and we were talking about future book projects. And I told them about my series on the 10 Commandments, that I'd love to turn that into a book. And there is a book that came out last fall by an author, a speaker. I won't say it's a preacher, but a speaker. And the name of the book is simply called I Can, I Will. And so I suggested that we do a series, that I publish a book on the 10 Commandments that I preach, and it's simply going to be called I Can't, I Won't, okay? Because, now I don't know if they're going to go for it, because it kind of is a direct shot at the other person, and I find that it's so much better to critique things by creating something better, in the words of Michelangelo, than to go for a direct, frontal attack. But if you think you're pretty good, go listen to that sermon series, okay? It's the best sermons on the 10 Commandments preached in the history of the church, okay? I'm just kidding. Just kidding. But consider this. If your thoughts, if everything inside of you, your thoughts, your emotions, the things that you may have thought about doing but didn't do, I haven't talked about your actions, what has happened on the outside. I'm just talking about what's happened on the inside. If those things were published on the screens with your face and email address next to it, okay? with just a list of every thought, every emotion, whatever the case may be. Would you stay seated, or would you slowly slip out the back door and move to Alaska? Okay, now I'm picking on Alaska because they were one of the 2 states that were not represented here at Liberate. We need Hawaii and Alaska here next year so we can have all 50 states represented. But we just aren't as good, as pure, as clean, as holy, as righteous as we want to believe ourselves to be. The reason that we desperately need to believe that we are is because we have located our sense of significance. We have thought that we can find the love and approval we crave if we can attain these things on our own. And so we tell lies to ourselves. And then we embody those lies to other people. None of us want to be exposed. And the reason we don't want anyone to know about those parts of us is because we're afraid people would reject us if they knew. And they would. I mean, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but most of them would, you know? So lying seems to be a promising self-salvation project. All we have to do is put our best foot forward and never let them see the truth about us, and we'll have the love and approval that we crave. So Ananias and Sapphira's sin was not primarily one of financial greed. They wanted others to value them and respect them. They heard about this guy Joseph, at the end of chapter 4. Sold his stuff, gave it to the church. And people are like, Joseph, this guy Joseph. I'm sure the word on the street was, wow, this guy Joseph. Well, Ananias and Sapphira wanted a piece of the action. I mean, it wasn't about the money. It was about what they were trying to get in terms of approval and love, acceptance, respect, honor. They were looking for glory. They were looking for all of those things. They wanted others to value them. But what if I told you that God knows the truth about you? That God knows the truth about you, He knows your secrets, and He loves you anyway. What if I told you that God knew you better than you knew yourself? And that He knows your past, He knows your history, He knows your present, He knows your addictions, He knows your struggles, He knows your fears, He knows the things that keep you up at night, He knows how greedy you are, how selfish you are, how prideful you are, how lustful you are. He knows all of that stuff. In fact, He knows that stuff about you better than you know it about yourself. Way better. God knows all of those things about you, and He loves you anyway. What if I told you that the approval you crave, you already possess because there was one who came to be truth for you? John 14:6. I'm the way, I'm the truth, I'm the life. You see, the temptation is to walk away from a sermon like this and think, okay, now this, I hate to say it, but this is sort of what moralistic preaching would look like, okay? Therapeutic preaching would look like. Moralistic, therapeutic preaching. This is what it would look like. Okay, lying is a useless self-salvation project. We get that. I mean, they lie, dead, okay? Well, I get that. The Bible tells us not to lie. So lying, especially when we understand why we do it, lying is a futile self-salvation project. So what's the answer? The answer to that is to tell the truth. So instead of lying to find life, I will tell the truth to find life. Okay? That right there is the moral of the story. But that's not the answer that we're given here, okay? I mean, that is not at all. We're not given, hey, listen, lying's bad. You can't find life by lying. Just go down the other road. You'll find life by telling the truth. That's not where we find life. That's moralism. That is still locating your hope for freedom and life in you and something you do, in someone that you can become. I won't be a liar. I'll be a truth teller. Lying's bad. Telling the truth is good. I can't save myself by lying. I'll save myself by telling the truth. I can't save myself by dishonesty, so I will save myself by honesty. Okay? No, the answer is not tell the truth instead of a lie. The answer is Jesus, who is the truth for you. That's the answer. That's the answer to our self-salvation projects. It's not, this self-salvation project over here isn't working, so I'll try this one. That's not, God's law destroys all of our self-salvation projects. Robert Capon put it this way: Jesus does not come to see if we are good. He comes to disturb the caked conventions by which we pretend to be good. Okay, I'll say it again. Jesus does not come to see if we are good. He comes to disturb the caked conventions by which we pretend to be good. Big difference. So the answer to being a liar, the badness of being a liar, is not to, well, I will pursue the goodness of being a truth teller. That's good. I'm not saying it's not. But when you dismiss this as a self-salvation project and see that it doesn't work, but then you find yourself gravitating over here as a self-salvation project, it equally doesn't work. In fact, sometimes the pride and the self-righteousness that accompanies a truth teller staring down their nose at a liar and saying, thank God I'm not like them. You know, I'm not like them. They're liars. I'm a truth teller. Couple things. One, you're a liar too. All right, so just get that sort of division out of your mind. You're lying to yourself. You're lying to other people. We just talked about all of that. But the answer when it comes to finding freedom and fullness of life, the answer is not avoid lying and tell the truth. The answer is and has always been Jesus, who is the truth for us. All of the truth that God requires is embodied in Jesus, who gave himself for us so that we could stand before God clothed in nothing but truth. Our hope is not in the avoidance of lying or the telling of truth. Our hope is in a God who loves and rescues liars, because liars are all that there are. Okay, to that, what I'm talking about here is something that's very, very counterintuitive to the way that you and I naturally think, because we are, in the words of Martin Luther, perpetually looking in for salvation. Christians do this all the time. People inside the church do this all the time. And what they've discovered, or what they want to discover, is, okay, being bad won't save me, so being good must. But it's equally dangerous. There are two ways to run from God. There's a way to run from God where you are trying to find freedom and fullness of life by breaking the rules. And then there's a way to run from God where you are trying to find freedom and fullness of life by keeping the rules. I'm not going to be a liar. I'll be a truth teller. That's still a futile self-salvation project. The answer is not and will never be inside of you, who you can become, being an overcomer, living the victorious Christian life, whatever that means. I mean, that's not the answer. The answer is and has always been outside of you. You will never find the freedom and fullness of life that you crave, that I crave, by looking in. Only by looking out, by looking up. And once this grips your truth, once the truth that God loves and rescues liars, because liars are all that he has to choose from, that God's outrageous mercy and his amazing grace condescends to save liars and cheaters and bad people, because that's all he has to choose from. Once that begins to grip your heart, something amazing happens. You begin to realize that all the approval that you long for and all the love you long for is already yours because of what Jesus has done for you, and the pressure to lie begins to wear off. I mean, and there is a lot of pressure when it comes to manufacturing a lovable self. You know, that's why I said a few minutes ago, that's the root cause of our exhaustion. It takes a lot of work, it takes a lot of energy, and it takes a lot of effort to wear masks. It just, I've quoted Chris Rock before, where he says, when people first meet you, they're not meeting you, they're meeting your representative, okay? And that's true of all of us. I mean, it takes a lot of work to put your best foot forward, to make sure they never see you sweat. It takes a lot of work. That is a burden that we bear. That makes life heavier. That makes life